everybody, I'm Mike Vizorin. We got a whole lot of new AI rules, not to mention $500 billion in funding. And we're going to talk a little bit about a new report from the Futurum Group about AI adoption. And finally, what's the latest in AI coding tools? You're watching Techstrong here. Hey, everybody, we're back and we got a full house today. We're going to start from the left-hand side of the country and work our way back as usual. John Schwartz is in Silicon Valley and, of course, tracking all things coming out of DC these days. John, good to see you.
Good to see you. We're going to have our hands full the next couple of years, I assume, and kind of fear. But yeah, we're going to start. We started off the day one of the administration with a lot of stuff to talk about today. So glad to be with you.
I'm not entirely clear which is further west, Ohio or Alabama, but since Ohio State won the championship, I'm going to go with our friends in Ohio first. Stephen Foskett, good to see you again as always.
It is great to be here. Unfortunately, I missed a Techstrong gang earlier this week, so I'm glad to join the gang today.
See that? You just can't live without us. So you missed a day and you had to show up for the next one. Wait an entire week. You had to be right there. So we're impressed. Of course, also in Ohio is Sulagna, who works on Tech Field Day with Stephen. They are longtime colleagues, and Sulagna is also running Techstrong AI for us. So Sulagna, good to see you.
Good to be back. Thank you.
And finally, John Willis, who I'm assuming is in Alabama and where it allegedly is snowing. Is this true, John?
This is true. And, I feel like I've got my picture on the cover of Rolling Stone. I've been invited to Tech Field Day. So
is that next week?
It is. And
I'll see you there. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we got three of us on this call that'll be there. Maybe we should do the gang from there.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah, well, I think we have to maybe on Wednesday and maybe Thursday. I'm from San Jose, so welcome back. I think, Stephen, you've been there. I'm not sure about you, John, but welcome times to San Jose.
I've been there a couple of times. Yeah.
I think that's an awesome idea. I'm going to pencil that in right now. I would love to get into what's going on though in the world because there's this new administration and they seem to be kicking out these executive orders at about a rate of about one every 2 minutes. The one that we're keeping an eye on at the moment though is what are they saying about AI? They seem to have first thing was scrapping the Biden rules, and now the second thing is lining up all these folks for this massive investment in AI. And of course, one of the first things they said was, hey, and this investment will not be subject to as many reviews because, John, who needs stinking regulations?
Yeah, who does? Hey, yes. So first I'm going to start with a visual presentation. I don't usually do this on the show, but I think it's important because in a sense, they say a picture says 1,000 words. This one might tell us about a couple of 100 billion. So here we have on this side, behind Trump, lined up several executives. You might remember them or recognize them. There's Jeff Bezos. There's Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Sundar Pichai. Evidently, Sergey Brin was around. I don't see him in the photo, but he was around. And I know that Sam Altman was around in Washington, D.C. And basically, after the inauguration, Trump signed an executive order, as you said, Mike, to scrap a 2023 executive order by President Biden, or former President Biden, that would kind of hold companies and developers of AI to some sort of safety standards or look at its potential harm to national security, consumers, and workers. So that's out of the way. On Tuesday, later in the day at the White House, Trump hosted Larry Ellison, the SoftBank CEO, Mr. Son, and Sam Altman as part of a announcement of up to $500 billion in private sector AI infrastructure investment in the U.S. There's also a joint venture between OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle called Stargate, which is a little ominous sounding, but nonetheless. So in a sense, yes, unfettered AI development as fast as you possibly can. These companies, I guess, will be entrusted to self-police themselves, just the way social media self-policed itself, going back to Zuckerberg. That didn't work out very well. But then again, Congress can't pass any legislation involved regulating any type of technology. So now we have this new kind of golden age of America, as it's been termed, or even the intelligence age or the intelligence race. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I anticipate, in addition to what we just talked about, even more actions spilling out. It really is a land rush and a land grab, and it will be interesting to see where this all goes. There's also even a report this morning I saw from a Wall Street analyst about this fate of TikTok, which is was extended 75 days on the ban, or from the ban, in which the speculation is that Musk and perhaps even Ellison might end up owning the U.S. operations of TikTok. So never a dull moment.
Well, that's a whole separate story. But
Yep.
John Willis, how are you feeling about all this? What's that?
Well, first off,
in the pit of
TikTok
your stomach, what do you
runs
feel?
on Oracle, right? So that's, there's a little interesting tidbit there, right? TikTok, the U.S. implementation of TikTok runs on Oracle, Oracle's infrastructure, Oracle's sort of cloud. So anyway, yeah, I mean, there are pluses and minuses, right? Like, I did some analysis yesterday on that because I wanted to write my own blog article about what do I think about this, and the pluses were that regulatory burden, the trade-offs, right? The federal overreach, right? Like, that there are things that were in the executive order that not everybody was happy with, right? Like, there was some definite, and then, but then there are things that, like, now we have no roadmap. To your point, John, like, I, I don't think allowing OpenAI, Sam Altman, to worry about me, like, I'm a little worried about that, or can have any concern for what he's doing when it comes to me, right? Like, so, and then on the Stargate thing, right? Like, I think I'm more interested in, like, how is that going to play out? Because I smell lawsuits all over the place by the ones that weren't invited. Right? Look what happened with the Federated Cloud, right? Look how long it took to get that whole thing cleared up, right? So, I didn't hear any mention of Google in there, Anthropic, and so I just wonder, like, is this just going to get stalled? It's just going to be a lot of noise because it's going to be stalled for the next year because there are going to be tons of lawsuits.
Well, I want to bring in the news about the framework for artificial intelligence diffusion, which was revealed last week under the Biden administration. One of their last efforts to tighten up the restrictions on export of AI chips. The framework is actually pretty impressive if you read through it, or if you read the analysis on semi-analysis by Dylan Patel. It's really interesting what they've done to really kind of fill in the holes in the Swiss cheese of restricting exports. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's really interesting what it does sort of from a forward-looking stance in terms of requiring major AI model development to be in tier one countries, and specifically U.S. companies have to develop AI in the United States. In fact, 50%, according to the framework, of their AI chips have to be situated within the United States. If you look at this Stargate announcement and you read between the lines through the filter of the framework on AI diffusion, one of the challenges from that framework was that Oracle invested heavily in offshore AI infrastructure, and that would be drastically reduced and restricted by the framework for AI diffusion. Stargate actually fixes that problem for Oracle. And another aspect that's interesting here is that, from what I'm hearing, Oracle has already built out too much AI infrastructure outside the United States previous to this, and they're going to have to basically reshore a lot of that infrastructure. So much of this investment might actually not be investment so much as reshoring of hardware that Oracle has already purchased and reshoring of capabilities that Oracle already has, potentially. Now, if the framework stands, and we have no reason to believe it won't, for what it's worth, the Trump rescinding Biden's executive order wasn't specifically directed at this particular AI initiative. In fact, it was part of the overall executive order called Initial Rescissions of Harmful Executive Orders and Actions, that revoked, well, dozens of executive orders all at once. And this one was just sort of part of what was swept up in there. I'm wondering if anyone in the Trump administration even knows what they've done in terms of rescinding this executive action. And furthermore, I'm wondering if anyone knows what that the actions of the Biden administration are part of the reason for this big Stargate announcement. But who knows? I mean, who cares? Frankly, it's better if they don't know, because then they won't knee jerk to kill it, because the framework for AI diffusion makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but it's it was a very perceptive point by you, John, earlier about the executive order and how it was written, because I did talk to a couple of people who had a hand in crafting it, and they acknowledged there were flaws in it. Their only concern was that now there's no real oversight or a roadmap, as you pointed out. The other thing, Stephen, and I was thinking about this, and I'm going to ask Mike as well. I always have a bit of a skeptical eye around these major investments or these plans that Trump announces. Like, this goes back throughout his
especially
career.
with SoftBank.
Yes, exactly. That's where I was going. And I'm not thinking Foxconn, I'm thinking SoftBank. I'm even thinking back to Trump's earlier, massive projects that he was going to build in New York City that he talked about for years, and they just never came to fruition. Even with the latest announcement in the Middle Eastern investment, where there were projects that didn't develop into anything. So I have a bit of a skeptical eye. Maybe this is a bit of a repurposing around Oracle and in SoftBank and OpenAI, but I'll believe it when I start seeing real action or tangible evidence.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of speculation in the real estate side. We talked about this on our show earlier, but a lot of the folks involved in this seem to be more interested in buying the land and hoping to sell it to somebody and maybe, mark that up than they are necessarily in solving the AI compute challenge. But Sulagna, what's your take on all this?
Yeah, Trump himself has said that this Stargate venture is going to help build more data centers and create more jobs and in the United States. But it really remains to be seen how it all pans out. There are a lot of ifs and buts, really. So I think it's something that we'll have to wait out and see.
And isn't it kind of inconsistent? Like, I read that like 100,000 jobs. Well, wait a minute, because Facebook has a model now. You can build data centers in months. They have models where they can be operated with less than 15 or 20 people, right? And AI is supposed to reduce headcount. So, like, why is this AI initiative now they're magically gonna, 10x jobs for what is traditionally being done now in data centers? So, and
Come on, there's going to be two guys managing the robot building the data center.
Yeah,
not there yet, but like
Yeah, for now at least, until we have a new super intelligent AI agent that runs everything.
The one last thing I will say is, if anybody's read The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis, that was baby steps compared to what we're going into right now in every sort of level. The fact that AI is so pervasive, the technology of AI, we know of what, how pervasive and how impactful this is. We've all been doing this for years. There's nothing been this impactful, and to just completely fifth risk it just
Hey,
seems awfully scary to me.
Hey, Stephen, have you heard the one about the future of the data center? It's going to be managed by one guy and a dog, and the dog is there to keep him from touching anything.
That's funny.
Right.
John, so what do you expect to see, John Schwartz, in the future here? It seems like this is just the beginning of a series of things, but what's your speculation?
I think we already are starting to see like this, like a chain event or domino principle. I mean, I don't know how it's all going to work out, but we're seeing for instance, Google just invested $1 billion in Anthropic, in which Amazon's already invested $8 billion. We're going to see all sorts of machinations, people moving in crazy speed. One interesting thing is, it's open game, open track. One interesting thing was there was no presence of NVIDIA that I know of at the inauguration, or that we didn't hear anything from them, or for that matter, even Microsoft, which I found was kind of interesting. I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts on that, but perhaps those are two companies that really don't really need the help of the administration or have to cozy up to it. But I found that kind of interesting, the absence of those two companies.
Yeah, I found
I'm
that
curious.
interesting too, and I heard the same thing, John. That Jensen Huang and Nvidia were nowhere to be seen with the inauguration funding, at the inauguration, et cetera. I believe Microsoft did contribute some money, but again, I didn't hear about the presence of the Microsoft execs or anything like that. Um, it does seem, you could, I guess, say that Nvidia doesn't really need the government's help. But frankly, NVIDIA is another one of the companies that's going to be really impacted by the framework for AI diffusion if it continues through. If I was,
They push back. They push back on that immediately.
oh
too,
yeah,
which is-
they push
for
back
the- for
strongly.
them,
And
very
in fact, that's
strongly
one
in the
reason that
blog
we
post,
heard
right?
about it was because NVIDIA was pushing back and got so much publicity. Um, I'm surprised that they're not, in their, let's say, to be nice, pressing the flesh in order to try to change the administration's goals.
Maybe they don't
Yes.
trust anybody. John Schwartz, though, I would love to get your opinion on this. Where does all this money come from? Because, in the state of New York right now, they're trying to scrape quarters off the
Yeah,
floor.
that's a good
to get cops in
question.
the subway.
So, I mean, going back to, I don't mean to make this personal, but going back to Trump and this based on his projects, and I've read a number of Lucky Losers, a very interesting book about him. And it just kind of looks at his career as kind of a microcosm of where the political side goes. And they would just create numbers on projects. And when I see 500 billion, it's a nice round number. I will believe it when that money actually comes to fruition. I just think it's a pumped up, almost imaginary number they just threw out there just to get our attention.
It has to be. He had no influence with OMB. Like, how does he even start
Yes.
throwing numbers out on day one when there's been no discussion with OMB? I mean, it's folly from the get go.
It's the total. You're right, John. It's the total MO. This is the method of operation. You throw out an outlandish number. This has happened for decades with him, and it goes back to his first administration. And again, I mean, this is all a lot of bluster. A lot of these plans are written in 2 paragraphs. There's no due diligence, as far as I know. It's just pie in the sky for now. I'll give them credit if something does come to fruition, but for now, I'm very skeptical about
That
it.
was my point about the lawsuit. It hasn't even gone through the Office of Management budget yet, right? Like, it hasn't gone through any economics reviews. It hasn't been, and then we're not even talking about the lawsuit. So it's all just fantasy. Now, I will say, if they create 100,000 jobs in Texas and they build data centers and they insource infrastructure, yeah, great job, buddy. But but just throwing your finger in the air and saying it will happen,
And
This goes back to all the manufacturing jobs that were promised in the first administration, and how did that work out? This is the point where I'm expecting Alan to show up, out of nowhere and talk about Foxconn and talk about the con of Foxconn, and I suspect that we're seeing history repeating itself again to a bigger extent and a more pumped up extent because it's AI, and AI has to be bigger and more hyped than anything else.
All right. Stephen, I'm going to give you last word on this, but I kind of feel like we're just watching an episode of AI Game of Thrones here.
Yeah, I with all of this stuff coming out of the administration, I'm really trying to figure out what the reality is. Like you all are saying, $500 billion, it's absolute fantasy. Remember, SoftBank, Masayoshi Son was right there with Trump in the first administration announcing a $100 billion investment in the United States that never really happened. That $100 billion was basically the size of the Vision Fund, which famously became a massive loser and lost at least a third of that money. A lot of those startups closed down. They didn't amount to anything. And it wasn't like that money actually ever came in. 500 billion, yeah, it's a nice big round number. It's 5 times the size of the Vision Fund. 100,000 jobs, sure. Nobody's even saying what this thing is going to be. What we have to do, just like everything that comes out of the Trump administration, is we have to read between the lines and figure out what this is going to do and how it's going to nudge the industry. Just like, the repeal of the executive order on AI safety, just like the AI diffusion framework, these things can have real impacts. They can cause the industry to turn. They can change the trajectory. We just have to try to not focus so much on the announced bluster and focus really on the reality of what's going to happen when these things hit the ground. When with the news of these AI data center build outs and this investment and so on, no, it's not going to be $500 billion. It's not going to be 100,000 jobs, but there is going to be some investment. There is going to be some reshoring, especially if the AI diffusion framework stays in place. And that actually will have an impact. And we just all have to try to figure out, kind of push away the noise and try to figure out where's the signal in this.
And I'm going to add one last thing, Mike, which is, I talked about this before the call. I don't think what's gone under the radar is what they've already done with CISA. It's now you have a perfect storm. You're literally pulling out all you're basically saying self-regulation, and you're basically dismantling CISA, right? I follow critical infrastructure. It's not like my space. Josh Corman has got me scared to death. If anybody knows Josh Corman about the cyber critical infrastructure, right? Water, supply, telecom. And like CISA is doing an amazing job there. And that stuff's all getting gutted.
All right. We will be coming back to that topic in a future show, no doubt. But in the meantime, what I learned today so far is if you want the entire AI oligarchy to bend the knee, you just have to point to some imaginary cash and they show up. So there we have it. All right. We'll be back in a minute. Hey, everybody, we're back and we're talking about some research from the Futurum Group, the parent of Techstrong. And it points to, well, what is the level of adoption among larger enterprises of AI? And it seems to suggest that this whole notion of a fear of missing out is maybe going away. People are taking their time a little bit and maybe being a little more thoughtful about how they're planning to use AI. Sulagna, this is on Techstrong AI, the site you run now. Give us the high points.
So yeah, it appears that the speed of AI innovation success is somewhat slowing down, at least in the early stages for some companies. This is owing to a number of factors, such as disconnect from the realities of implementation, adopters' expectations are not well managed, poor ROI focus, expectations for quick gains, integration issues, and most importantly, lack of hands-on strategy from CEOs. The Futurum Group's State of Market survey, which recently released, shines light on this. Some of the stats say that 62% of CEOs view AI as a powerful force of change, but 38% just see it only as a hype. And only 46% of the companies surveyed said that they were very prepared for AI adoption, and 31% were only moderately prepared. And only 48% prioritize rigorous ROI measurement. So, and John also did an article on this. So I feel like that there are some takeaways from this. It feels like to reap all the benefits of AI, companies need to have some things in place, such as to start with, there should be preparedness, which is crucial, and sort of internal training, the ability to accommodate and manage the growing corpus of data, making sure that people are trained to handle the technology at a professional level, putting in place best practices and guardrails, and slowly and steadily incorporate the change instead of shoving it down employees.
All right. Well, you had me at CEOs and disconnect from reality, so I've been laughing ever since. But
Yeah, that was
But
another interesting thing to read read in this study, was that incredible disconnect. 78% of CEOs strongly believe in their own ability, their personal ability to guide AI for their companies, but only 28% of mid-level managements agreed with
Mm.
that. Ouch.
You mean the people actually in the trenches, right?
Yeah.
What there's one thing I think there was a takeaway. I'll get out of the way because I talked too much in the last segment. There's a takeaway that from the CEO sentiment study that the analysis reveals, as you said, Stephen, a striking disconnect. The most successful companies are those where top leadership deliberately steps back from hands-on AI strategy. That kind of stuck with me.
I know,
Yikes.
right? It's incredible. I mean, if and the disconnect with customers as well. You know, this whole idea that CEOs are all jumping in there, but according to this study, only 24% say that customers are specifically asking for AI-based solutions. That's wild because that doesn't say 24% of customers. It says 24% of CEOs say their customers, which means that could be much less in terms of customer demand because that's only the ones that are going up to the CEO. It is incredible, but it kind of matches. I mean, do you know of anybody who's like out there, like going to their, I don't know, their main, software as a service supplier or whatever, and saying, show me your AI strategy. I need more AI. You need to put some more AI in here. No, customers don't want AI. Customers want solutions. AI is a way to make solutions. It's not the solution.
Right. It's investors who are screaming about show me your AI strategy, right? At the end of the day. John Willis, I know we have talked about this subject in the past with you, and it rankles you because you see so much AI
hate the
progress.
I hate the Wall Street view on this, right? Because what I'm seeing in the companies that I'm visiting, well, first off, if the CEO says it's so, it will be so. All right, like that's just the reality of so saying they're disconnected and but there are incredible projects going on. A lot of them I can't talk about. And what I do know is there's a lot of reluctancy to actually promote what they're actually doing because of the competitive advantage. I mean, they're creating so much innovation internally. Now, how it all winds up, and we'll go back to what's the famous quote that if Ford, if I asked the customers what I want, we'd still be driving the horse and carriage, right? Like, I don't think that's a really, to me, that doesn't stick, right? The organization, like I know companies that have incredible amount of data. One company has incredible amount, you probably figured out, but they have incredible amount of data on every restaurant on the planet. Like they're figuring out how to do something with that data, right? If they know every transaction of like 70% of all the humans who eat out in America, or maybe even in Europe, right? Like there's gold there. So it's the data stupid. It is that organizations are not actively telling you what they're doing. On a previous Techstrong, we talked about, I had one client literally make me sign a second NDA. Not only that was I under NDA with the client I was working for, but I literally had to do another NDA to not discuss what they were doing specifically. They're very, like rightfully so. Like if you're in a competitive space and you believe you have an innovative idea. So I don't know what the right answer is. Wall Street's usually better at this stuff than I am, but I do know, my ground level knowledge of what's going on in some of the large corporations that I've been talking to. One I can talk about publicly is what John Deere's doing. John Deere is across the board, figuring out how to use this stuff strategically, like a transformational, and that's the thing Wall Street's not looking for. They're looking for like, where's the money? Where's the budget? There are organizations that are completely transforming their talent and innovation strategies based on this.
That's interesting that you said that, John, because I was in Pittsburgh last week at Carnegie Mellon, and I went through the robotics lab, and I talked to some folks in agriculture, especially AI agriculture, and John Deere's, that name kept cropping up, and they, so to speak, no pun intended, but that was one of the key case studies. Actually, it's something we should look into. But the fact that you brought that up is really interesting to me. They are going to transform, and they are somewhat a little bit more transparent than others. That's always the key, as you said. A lot of these companies are reluctant to say what they're doing. So where's the hype and where's the reality? It's somewhere in between.
Stephen, I'd love to get your opinion on this, though. When I talk to people, they're in a quandary. They cannot fund every AI project, and about half the AI projects are rapidly becoming table stakes, right? They're not competitive advantages. They're things I need to do to stay competitive. And then they're trying to figure out, well, what are the things that are going to really make a difference for us to be competitive? And it turns out everybody's kind of working on very similar things. And so, what is that window of opportunity around AI?
Well, that's an interesting aspect of this study as well, is that it does show a real differentiator between sort of these younger digital native startup companies and the more established companies. To the extent that, at least I'm still working my way through this, I'm still trying to really digest it, because this is an incredible data source. Let me tell you, I've never seen it, this much information direct from these CEOs. It seems like established companies are smartly focusing on how they can use AI to transform their existing businesses, how they can use it to, as we were just hearing, to ingest existing data, to come up with novel uses and novel applications for the existing market they have. Whereas the more digital native, smaller, scrappier companies, they're looking for transformative business models, and they're looking for ways that they can use data in a way that nobody has thought of yet. And that, I think, is really what we're going to be looking out for here. We've already seen a divergence. I mean, John, Willis, and I, we were at the early stages of cloud. There was that incredible divergence between sort of the cloud native companies and the cloud followers. We're seeing that 10x with AI. The AI native companies, the data native companies, they really understand the capabilities of this technology. They're looking for novel ways to use it. They're looking ways that can serve as accelerators and differentiators. What has to happen for the rest of the market is what happened with cloud technology, which is where they look for the most useful tools, the juiciest morsels, the things that can really transform what they're already doing, and adopt those things, embrace those things. That's what we're seeing with cloud technology. I think that's what we're going to see with AI technology in the coming years. John, what do you think, John?
Oh, I mean, I was just going to pipe in because I do talk a lot, but I talked about this, Mike, on a previous call. The Friday gang, if you will. But I talked to CIO near the end of last year, and he said something really insightful about, like, John, I'm not in this for the ROI. I'm in it. What I have to do in my organization is create a sort of seamless, horizontal, sort of talent and innovation transformation, right? And like you listen to that and say, oh, it's just CIO speak. But he knew, like, this whole question of, like, what's going to happen. This comes up a lot, right? If we don't need junior developers, how do we create apprentices, right? This comes up all the time with AI. Well, the savvy business or CIO, the executive team who understands your business, are realizing that they're going to have to create a talent, like from the 30-year Java developer to the 2 months out of Carnegie Mellon AI expert student. They're going to have to create a seamless innovation strategy. And again, if I knew that, I'd be making, $7 million a year for a corporation. But but that I think the organizations that are thinking like that way, again, I want to be careful with John Deere. I'm talking about the stuff that's public out there. But like those are the type of things I'm looking for when I'm interviewing, when I'm hanging out with Gene Kim's crowd. And, I want to hear how you think. Are you just like letting people go off and create pilots and co-pilots and chatbots and because you can? Or are you setting sort of an across the board, or at least attempting, and back to yours, Stephen, that was the haves and have-nots in cloud, right? The haves understood this was a technology transformation, and they stepped back, and some of them, Capital One. Capital One is a great example of a company embraced it strategically in the financial sector, probably one of the earliest ones to truly take advantage of cloud. And they did it, head to toe. And so that's what I'm looking for is the organization's CIO talk like this.
So, Sulagna, let me ask you this question. What do you think the odds are the next great thing in AI that a company does is going to be driven from the top down, or is it really going to be driven from the bottom up by the people who are closer to where the AI is going to make a difference?
Bottom up is how ideally it should be, but oftentimes, like you mentioned, there is this strange disconnect between the C-suite executives and the people that are working at the ground level doing the real work. So, as long as that there's a bridge between the two of them, I see it's very difficult for companies to really implement that kind of a systemic change where it is done in a disciplined sort of way. But surely these smaller companies, and it's actually really following the cloud trajectory where companies are at first like they're overwhelmed with suddenly there's this AI rush, and then with all of the aggressive strategies and stuff like that, and there's that myopia that if I can embed AI into my organization, it is my ticket to success. So I think we'll slowly get out of that phase to a point where companies start to see more clearly and see how it can be actually implemented step by step in a way that works. So I hope to see that kind of change happening in the future for sure.
Here's my bet. My bet is that the middle managers are going to wind up being the heroes that implement this stuff, working from the folks at the bottom up. And they're going to become the next people taking the CEO survey because they're going to replace all the guys who couldn't figure out how to make it work because they're too far removed from the actual thing that the company does. Steven, am I crazy?
I think you're not crazy, and I think that's what we've seen in the past as well. And one more thing from the study, it once again shows companies are desperate for people with this kind of knowledge and skill. And I think that if those of you listening are interested in what to get involved in, I know this is not going to be a news flash to you, but hey, maybe learn a little bit about AI.
There you go. Hey, I think that goes for everybody. If you learn about AI, you're going to write your own ticket because, as they say, it's not AI that's going to make you lose your job. It's the person who knows how to use AI who's going to take your job, right? All right. We'll be back in a minute, folks.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey, everybody, we're back and we're returning to one of our favorite subjects, which is just how smart are these AI coding tools. And we talked about in a previous episode about a survey from folks that suggested that the amount of bad code being generated by these tools was high because they didn't understand enough context about the deployment environment. So developers were spending too much time debugging code written by the AI tool. Since then, we have seen some advances. Devon's talking about a new version of their tool that's smarter and has more reasoning capabilities. And then there's even a startup that's, but I'm going to butcher this, Pythagora or something of that effect, which designed their tool to keep the developer engaged. Their argument is that developers, if they're engaged, will understand the code and it won't be so hard to debug it because part of the problems with some of these other tools is they're just black boxes and they generate code and nobody knows how they did it. John Willis, you cover this space more closely than any of us. What's your take on where are we? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mess, just like everything else, right? I think, my personal opinion to Devin, it was dead on arrival. We've gone through that. They don't even show up on the benchmarks. They don't even try to show up on the benchmarks anymore. The SWE benchmark, which is good or bad, it is the litmus test for a coding agent. They hover in on their last peak was about 14 to 20%. The benchmark now is a 55% resolution to 60%. And there's just a lot of players since, even the Open Devon team is now called All Hands. They renamed themselves, right? They were basically created literally about a week after Devon announced, their sort of fictitious resolution capabilities, which were just chopped up by the industry. And Open Devon was a response to like, hey, like this is not that hard. The AI engine does most of the work, right? And so I find that two simple open source tools, Ada and Klein, literally do everything I need to do. I mean, you've heard all about Cursor. There's just a lot of plays. Guy Purdy, the Sneak founder, he's got something called Tesla. I mean, Amazon Q developer shows up really high on benchmarks. Uh, you know, um, Copilot Workspace, which still I don't think has been released by Microsoft. So it's a very competitive space. But the key thing that you said there, which is when these things first started coming out, the context windows weren't as large as they are now. And what a lot of people are realizing, and I think Ada is the first one I'd say to this, is they allow you to take all the non-functionals, like your Jira tickets, your documentation. And this has been sort of the biggest problem with these tools is if you just ask it to generate code, it really doesn't have any strong context of all the other resources that are related to the code it's generated. And so now these context windows are so big, like you can literally, in some cases, you just load a repo into these engines and just say, start explaining this to me. So there's sort of two worlds. There's tools that are staying far ahead of everybody. So like pull in when I'm going to code now, I want to take all the documentation. I'm going to take the Terraforms. I'm going to take everything I possibly can and throw it in the context window when I ask it to create a service. Patrick Dubois talks about this eloquently in some of his latest presentations about like the world has to be this massive context of not just code. Code is such a small part of the operational cost of an application. We all know that. So I think, again, the balance then is the technologies. I mean, like all of the major, sort of LLMs or models now have their own agentic capabilities. A lot of the early Devon, Open Hands, all those things were that they were implementing agentic capabilities on platforms that didn't have it, right, built in. And so I think the message is, learn how to create agent-based solutions. Learn how to let AI understand the full context of your service. And then, don't get locked in right now to any one solution because it's moving so fast. I mean, just what's happened in the last quarter, or not even the last 4 months, between GPT-4o going all the way into O3. I mean, it's just mind-boggling what's happened in the last 4 months. Other
Hey,
reasons.
John,
Yeah.
can I ask you a quick question? I don't. This might be a non sequitur, but what? I mean, you know this so well. What about Operator from OpenAI? This might be coming up. Some version of it, or early version, might be coming out soon. I've read to the point where it has ability to autonomously code or even do functions without any human interaction. Is that kind of play into what you're mentioning?
Yeah, no, again, they've already sort of created the agentic, capabilities. And now, yeah, I mean, like, again, the point being, well, that goes back to a bigger picture. I always felt this. I've been surprised that, and I'm going to sort of wiggle around this and get to the point to your question, which is, I thought when Microsoft Copilot Workspace, which I think is still in beta, they were going to win it all. Because if the big providers provide a high percentage of resolution or ability to sort of create code autonomously, then I don't see any of the little players surviving, right? And so, yeah, I mean, if OpenAI can take, what they're doing and create, sort of an operator level of efficiency. I'm still waiting to see what Google's publicly going to come out with in this space. Like, they have it, it's internally. I've talked to people, they use it internally. So there's one element of that question, which is I think the big players are probably going to dominate. If you've gone all in on Google and Vertex, and they have a reasonable solution that benchmarks pretty well, then you're probably not going to jump over to the operator or Anthropics or certainly not like Tesla or. And then again, I think the interesting then becomes the open source edge players. And I'm probably the only one that calls it, but Ader and Klein and these tools that are really effective is instead of big picture $500 a month or $1,000, $2,000 all you can eat Devon solutions.
So, John, let me ask you a question here about all that context, because one of the things I'm starting to hear from folks is, do I need an AI coding tool that is tightly integrated with the rest of my repositories and my DevOps platform to get that context? Or can the AI coding tools are they more disposable in that sense where I can just swap them in and out as I feel like?
No, I think in fact, I the first time I heard of this Pythagor, so I'll replicate your like destroying the name, but like I think that's interesting because that one of my arguments that I get a lot of pushback from all the sort of AI kids and is that the main repositories are GitHub, like all the engines that are coding system all being trained by open source GitHub libraries, basically, right? Or right? And there's a big difference between, for the last 10 years, Capital One with 18 to 20,000 Java developers, and how you build services in an organization like Capital One on, probably, certainly hundreds of millions of lines of code, maybe billions of lines of code, and code that's been generated in open source projects. So that, my argument, there's got to be a difference. So organizations that are helping, and there's a few of these happening, helping go in and understand your libraries, your code. I don't have any data on it. I think they're going to be far more efficient. You think about what Capital One or a large bank or Goldman Sachs has to do for their code base to work. It's just the decision and the training and all the sort of code generation is just going to be significantly different.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that, John, because I think that you're really onto something there. What you've been saying a lot here makes a lot of sense to me, and that's that essentially if the code generator is just generating code, that's not all that interesting. If it's generating your code, then it's much more interesting. If it's helping you to generate what you want. One of the interesting things about this Pythagora product is that it doesn't just spit out code, it's a conversation with the developer. I'm not sure that that's the right way to do it, but it's a good way to do it or better way to do it. To your point on Microsoft Copilot, I had the same opinion that Copilot was going to be radically successful, mainly because it's right there in your IDE. It has access to your code. I mean, Microsoft has GitHub. The same with Vertex. I mean, if you're a Google developer, then Google can do a lot with what's already there with the rest of your corpus of code. A lot of these open source, what you're calling edge copilots or edge products, I mean, that's kind of what they're doing too, is they're watching you, they're helping you. It's kind of like, Sulagna, when you're working with an AI writing tool, there's a big difference between one that actually knows your writing style and one that's just spitting out words, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I personally try to not put a lot of faith on tools like that do coding, because I keep hearing from a lot of people that sometimes the coder errors, there are bugs, and it takes way a lot of time to really fix them and get them in shape so that they can run it. So what I personally think is it's wiser to actually take it with a grain of salt, really, and see that these tools are basically meant to help you than to just do your job for you. So you can maybe use that code as a template and do your changes, and even if they're tying in all the contacts and all that information and personalizing it to your needs, it's still important that there is a human in the loop who's like actually looking at it and making sure that it's all well and good to run, because it's code after all. The smallest mistake can make the biggest difference.
Willis, last question on this. Um, I also wonder if we're overly obsessed with coding. And if I look at a developer's job, coding is maybe 15 to 20% of what they actually do. And so do we need AI to do all the other stuff? Because, we're not really going to drive productivity just because
Well,
we can
that's the
code.
point, right? Like coding is a lot of copy and paste. It's finding routines. It's like most coders, if you write 10 lines of code, it basically turns into 1,000, 5,000 lines of code anyway, because of all the libraries. Right. So I don't really adhere to this sort of idea that AI tools are going to make worse code. When you got 20,000 developers in your organization, there's a lot of I ask those people like, oh, I can't use, Copilot, or I can't use this. I'm like, how many of your, that base of Java developers you think actually writes error-free code? And the truth of the matter is these tools are going to do better than the average coder. They already are proving it on benchmarks. So the argument that AI generates bad, every implementation of coding will have bugs and errors. The question is, will these things get better? Are they like at a point where they are better? I believe they are. And then to your point, Mike, like coding an application is a lot more than just sitting down and writing code. It's design, it's requirements. It's like the same thing. I use a lot of tools for writing. I don't let the AI write my articles, but what I will do is I will feed every concept and idea and all the things I want into it. Right. So I think, when you talk about a service that's being built, the human in the middle is the design. You don't just say, hey, I am a business that sells cars. Go ahead and figure out how to write software that will do a better job. Like that's not how it's going to work anytime soon. It's going to be, we have this business campaign, we have this idea, and we're going to go through design and we're going to requirements. There's going to be humans all a part of it. But there's a point of where somebody just sits down and literally 80 to 90% of what they're actually doing is using reusable libraries. I've said this before. Topo Pal talked about a Capital One where he was asked one time to find how much of their code base was open source, and it was not open source. How much of their code had they actually written? It was 1%. 99% of their code. He's publicly said this. 99% of their code was libraries. So now we have AI tools that literally are doing the same thing on at 1% or 5%. It's definitely never more than 10% in any modern organization. So what are the decisions that are going wrong by that AI is doing worse than human? Picking the wrong libraries? Putting in the wrong configurations? Those are things that humans do pretty terribly. So I don't know.
So, folks, I guess, we're not going to miss copying and pasting code ultimately, which may account for why a lot of these repositories are seeing a decline in overall traffic because people are just taking it from the OpenAI tool. Hey, folks, thank you all for being on the show as usual. You guys were awesome, shared great insights. And with that, I'm going to point everybody to the rest of the lineup coming up right behind this show. Techstrong TV is coming up. Stay tuned, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.